the weight of desperation measured in silver coins. This is how your childhood dies in a single transaction. Rural China, somewhere in the dusty provinces where hope withers like crops in drought. You stand exposed in the village center while merciless sun scorches your neck. Dust coats your throat like ash. A stranger in silk robes tilts your face toward the blinding light, studying bone structure with the cold precision of a livestock appraiser. His thumb traces your jawline, testing the firmness of youth. He forces your mouth open, counting teeth one by one, the identical inspection a horse trader performs before negotiating price. Your hands are yanked forward without ceremony. He examines each finger individually, testing flexibility, checking for scars, rotating your wrists to assess their delicacy. He turns your palms skyward and traces the lines as though reading a map of your future, a future he's about to purchase. Behind you, your mother trembles like a leaf in winter wind. Your father's gaze remains fixed on the cracked earth beneath his feet, refusing to witness what he's about to do. The stranger states a price. Your mother collapses as though her strings were cut. Your father doesn't protest, doesn't negotiate, doesn't even look at you. He simply extends his weathered palm. Cold coins clatter into his hand, each one sealing your fate. In that moment, your family name becomes meaningless. Your village becomes a memory. Your identity becomes merchandise. You don't understand the numbers being discussed. You don't comprehend the contract being agreed upon. All you understand is sound your mother's voice tearing through the afternoon air, screaming your name with desperate love. Neighbors whisper behind cupped hands. Your own heartbeat thunders in your ears like war drums. The purchaser takes your wrist and pulls. You twist back for one final glimpse. Your mother reaches for you with clawing fingers. Someone restrains her thrashing body. Your father's shoulders shake, but his eyes never rise from the dirt. You will never sleep under this roof again. You will never hear that name spoken aloud again. Because across the vast territories of imperial China, a machine has been operating without interruption for over 2,000 years. A machine so thoroughly integrated into the social fabric that court historians documented human transactions with the same bureaucratic indifference they applied to grain taxes and military conscription. They carried the designation Nanfeng companions, young men acquired through purchase, subjected to intensive conditioning, and maintained as exclusive property of emperors, nobles, and wealthy officials. What occurred behind palace walls was so carefully concealed that collective memory erased it entirely, until now. If this buried history strikes you like a physical blow, hit that like button and subscribe. 1 second of your time amplifies our ability to resurrect voices that empires tried to silence forever. This story doesn't begin with silk curtains and jade ornaments. It begins with empty bowls and desperate choices. For centuries under successive dynasties, northern provinces starved in predictable cycles. The Yellow River China's great sorrow flooded without warning. Monsoon patterns failed. Entire harvests rotted in waterlogged fields. When a family had sold every chicken, every cooking pot, every scrap of metal they owned, there remained one commodity with market value: their children. Professional acquisition agents roamed these devastated landscapes like vultures circling carrion. They operated under a chilling designation: Renya human teeth. Not because of what they sold, but because they bit into every province, stripping it down to bone. They weren't seeking strong backs for manual labor. They hunted for something far more specific: unblemished skin that hadn't been ravaged by disease, bright, intelligent eyes that suggested quick learning, refined bone structure that would age gracefully, vocal cords capable of carrying melody without cracking. But physical attributes alone proved insufficient. They tested memory, wit, the ability to recite poetry without stumbling. They wanted someone who could laugh at precisely the right moment, complete a literary reference, discuss philosophy with a provincial governor, because the wealthiest buyers in the empire weren't shopping for ordinary servants. They wanted conversation partners, companions who could impress guests and soothe powerful egos. In village after village, boys stood in humiliating rows while strangers evaluated them like livestock at market. Hands received particular scrutiny, slender fingers indicated potential for guqin mastery, the 7-string zither that every cultivated household prized. Scouts analyzed facial bone structure with the arrogance of men who believed they could predict appearance 5 years into the future. Those who satisfied their criteria were removed immediately, torn from families without ceremony or farewell. Contracts appeared written in classical script that most farming families couldn't decipher. A father would press his seal into red wax or simply nod agreement, surrendering his son to 10 or 15 years of contracted service. Most couldn't pass the legal terms. Those who could understood that alternatives didn't exist. But here's the component that official records deliberately omit. Most of these boys never walked home again. Not because contractual obligations prevented return, but because by the time their terms concluded, the person they had been no longer existed. You arrive at the conditioning facility carrying everything that proves your existence. A pair of straw sandals worn thin by familiar paths. A wooden comb your mother carved with her own hands. A name that connects you to ancestors, to dialect, to the only life you've ever known. Within hours, each item vanishes like smoke. Your clothes are stripped away and burned. Your head is shaved until your scalp gleams like polished stone. The comb disappears into someone's robes, never to be seen again. A scribe with ink-stained fingers studies your face and assigns you a replacement identity, not something your grandmother would recognize. Something artificial, expensive-sounding, designed to appeal to jaded aristocrats. Precious jade, autumn moon, morning frost. These aren't names, they're price tags, product labels crafted to make merchandise more appealing to wealthy buyers. You're draped in silk robes that mark you as property rather than person. From this moment forward, every breath you take, every thought you think, every word you speak falls under external control. If this were a different story, this is where the wise mentor would appear to guide and protect you. In this story, the teachers don't rescue you, they refine you. That's infinitely worse. The educational curriculum would impress any elite academy. Poetry: first you copy verses until your wrist cramps and your fingers bleed, then recite until your tongue moves without conscious thought. Calligraphy follows, hours spent coaxing each brushstroke to perfect balance between weight and grace. Musical instruction comes next. The guqin, bamboo flutes, drums that must be struck with precisely enough force to suggest passion without vulgarity. You learn to pour tea without making sound, to walk so your footsteps whisper rather than announce, to read facial expressions across a crowded room and know whether to joke, sympathize, or vanish. They even teach medicinal basics enough to mix soothing drafts, enough to massage cramped shoulders or an official aching head. You study accounting, political intrigue, anything that might increase your auction value. On paper, it resembles opportunity a peasant boy learning aristocratic arts. Underneath, something far more sinister unfolds. The real curriculum is psychological annihilation. Every expression of homesickness receives correction through punishment. Any sign of independent thought is treated as manufacturing defect. Any memory of home, family, or former identity gets systematically dismantled until you genuinely believe your only purpose for breathing is bringing pleasure to your future master. The goal isn't mere obedience, it's total spiritual submission. They need you to forget that any other way of existing was ever possible. They didn't want servants who obeyed, they wanted humans who forgot they were human. According to documentation from the Tang Dynasty, which ruled from 618 to 907 CE, the financial cost of this manufacturing process was staggering, but the human cost was worse. Historical accounts suggest that roughly 4 of every 10 young men purchased for conditioning never survived to become actual concubines. 4 out of 10. Gone forever. They were consumed by exhaustion, malnutrition, disease, or simply the crushing psychological weight of having their entire identity erased before they possessed sufficient maturity to understand what identity meant. Those who failed to survive were buried in unmarked graves behind the facilities. Families never received notification. They simply vanished as though birth had never occurred, leaving no trace in any record. And here's what haunts me about this segment. We're not discussing warfare or plague. We're discussing a business model that calculated a 40% loss rate and considered it acceptable overhead for profitable operation. Everyone knew. The facility supervisors knew, the scouts knew, the purchasing families knew. And the system continued operating across centuries because the mathematics worked for everyone except the humans being processed. For those who survived conditioning, the reward was a different species of imprisonment altogether. Your quarters reflected your impossible social position, superior to household servants, inferior to wives or concubines. Decorated chambers with silk drapery, jade ornaments, carved furniture of exquisite craftsmanship. Beautiful, comfortable, and locked from the outside. Consider that arrangement: silk adorning the walls, iron securing the doors. Daily existence became perpetual performance art. You woke before dawn to invest hours in self-preparation. cosmetics applied with precision, clothing arranged without wrinkles, hairstyle to perfection. Everything had to be flawless because summons could arrive at any moment, and appearing unprepared was the fastest route to falling from favor. In this world, losing favor didn't mean reassignment, it meant replacement, disposal, ejection with nothing but the clothes you wore. At 20 years old, your useful life was considered nearly finished. At 25, you became invisible. Competition among companions within the same household was vicious by design. Masters deliberately positioned them against each other, rewarding the most entertaining while punishing whoever pleased least. Trust became impossible, friendship turned dangerous. The person sleeping in the adjacent room would betray you instantly if it meant securing one additional week of favor. Food became another weapon of control. Favorites received delicacies, roasted duck, exotic fruits, wine that warmed your chest. Those who had fallen from grace survived on table scraps and yesterday's rice. Since physical appearance was your only protection against catastrophe, controlled starvation became a death sentence for your career. Everything I've described occurred in private households across China. But inside the imperial palace, this system operated on a scale that defies comprehension. According to historian Brett Hinch, whose scholarship is considered definitive on this subject, all 10 emperors during the first 2 centuries of the Han Dynasty maintained documented male favorites. All 10. This wasn't scandal or secret vice, it was recorded in official government histories like routine administrative policy. But one story eclipses all others, a tragedy that literally transformed the Chinese language. His name was Xian. He entered imperial service around 4 BCE, son of a minor court official, approximately 17 years old. The Book of Han, one of China's most important historical texts, described him as possessing a face like polished white jade and eyes that held starlight. Emperor Ai noticed him during a routine ceremony, and from that moment the emperor's obsession consumed the entire government like wildfire. The ascent was vertical and terrifying. First came wealth beyond imagination: estates, titles, treasure worth billions in modern currency. Dongxian's father was elevated to nobility. His sister was installed in the imperial harem. A residence rivaling the palace itself was constructed exclusively for his use. Then came political power. The Prime Minister Wang Jie wrote a carefully worded warning letter. He reminded Emperor Ai of historical precedent, specifically Deng Tong, a previous favorite who had died in poverty after his emperor's death. Emperor Ai's response was swift and brutal. He had the Prime Minister arrested on fabricated charges. The old man died in prison, silenced forever. By age 22, Dongxian was appointed Supreme Commander of the Armed Forces. A youth with no military training, no battlefield experience, given command of the empire's defense simply because the emperor couldn't bear separation from him. And then came the moment that would echo through Chinese culture for 2 millennia. Picture a quiet afternoon in the imperial chambers. Emperor Ai and Dongjian rest on woven mats after a midday meal, drowsy from wine and warmth. Dongxin drifts to sleep, his head gradually settling onto the billowing silk sleeve of the emperor's robe. Emperor Ai awakens. Court business demands his attention, ministers wait, documents require signatures. The empire needs governing. He looks down at his sleeping companion, face peaceful in slumber. Any reasonable person would gently wake their partner or carefully extract their arm. Instead, Emperor Ai reaches for a small blade and, with infinite care, cuts his own imperial sleeve away from the robe rather than disturb Dongxian's rest. That single gesture became the most famous love story in Chinese history. The tale spread through court circles overnight. Officials began cutting their own sleeves in imitation, desperate to display similar refined devotion. The phrase "the passion of the cut sleeve" entered common usage as the standard Chinese expression for this type of relationship. It remained in the language for over 2,000 years. It's still recognized today, but gravity always claims its due. The higher the pedestal, the more devastating the collapse. In August of 1 BCE, Emperor Ai fell gravely ill. He was only 26 years old. As life drained from his body, he made a decision that shocked everyone present. He ordered the imperial throne passed to Dongxian. The court froze in horror. This was madness beyond comprehension. The moment the emperor's heart stopped beating, predators emerged from every shadow. The Grand Empress Dowager, a woman forged from steel and survival instinct, moved with lightning precision. She seized the imperial seal, reinstated exiled officials, and stripped Dongxian of every title, every possession, every protection he had accumulated. It took less than 24 hours. In the morning, Dongjian commanded armies. By sunset, he and his wife lay dead in their mansion, having chosen poison over the torture that awaited them. Because in this system, a favorite power lasted exactly as long as his emperor's heartbeat, not 1 second longer. This cycle meteoric rise, followed by catastrophic destruction, wasn't an aberration. It was the system's design, repeated across centuries with mechanical precision. Dun Tong, the boatman who once minted his own currency, starved to death on the streets exactly as a fortune teller had predicted. Han Yan, granted unprecedented access to the imperial harem, was executed for overstepping invisible boundaries. Every dynasty, every generation, the same rhythm. Favorites ascended, emperors died, and men who had possessed everything were stripped of everything the moment power changed hands. The hypocrisy was breathtaking. Confucian scholars composed volumes about virtue and moral governance while purchasing young men from desperate families. Buddhist monks preached detachment from worldly desires while hiding favorites in monastery chambers. Government officials regulated the practice while participating in it themselves. The system didn't exist despite Chinese moral philosophy. It existed because of Chinese power structures. Favorites were political instruments, symbols of an emperor's ability to do whatever he pleased without consequence. 5 centuries after Xian, Ming Dynasty Emperor Zhengde pushed this tradition to its most grotesque extreme. He abandoned the Forbidden City, entirely the most secure, powerful building in the world, because it bored him. He constructed the Leopard Quarter, a 200-room complex built adjacent to the Imperial Zoo. Imagine the cacophony, tigers roaring, elephants trumpeting, mixing with music and laughter from his collected companions. He filled this private world with performers, wrestlers, monks, and favorites gathered from across the empire, ruling through eunuch intermediaries known as the 8 Tigers. For 13 years, ministers had to hunt the emperor among animal cages to present essential documents. Those who complained faced beatings so severe that over a dozen officials died from their injuries. When Jingde drowned at 29 after falling from a boat, his successor dismantled the Leopard Quarter overnight. Gold was confiscated by the chest. Favorites were beaten, exiled, or executed. The memory was systematically purged. Eventually, the imperial system itself cracked and fell. The revolution of 1911 ended dynastic rule. The communist victory in 1949 promised liberation from feudal oppression. Did the victims finally find freedom? Not exactly. Revolutionary authorities viewed former concubines not as victims, but as living symbols of aristocratic decadence. During political purges, elderly men who had once been pampered favorites were dragged from hiding and forced to denounce their former masters. Some were sent to labor camps for re-education. Others, lacking practical skills for survival in a harsh new world, simply vanished into the anonymous crowds. The revolution that promised to liberate the oppressed simply found new ways to use people the old system had already destroyed. And here's what haunts me about this entire history. We remember the emperor's names. We remember famous favorites like Dongxian and Din Tong, whose tragedies became cautionary tales. We even remember Dongxian's wife, who chose death beside her husband rather than face the world alone. But the nameless multitudes boys sold from villages and buried without markers before reaching adulthood. Men discarded when their youth faded, people who died begging on unfamiliar streets, carrying names that weren't even their own. We don't know a single one of their names. 2,000 years of systematic erasure, so thorough it deleted even the memory of deletion. 2 millennia of this machine. Millions of families making impossible choices. Millions of young men walking through doors they would never exit as themselves. The system was so efficient, so carefully engineered, that it erased even the fact of its victims' existence. That's not random cruelty, that's industrial-scale human processing. This is the historian fact. We don't sanitize the past, we excavate the truth that powerful people buried. If you believe these silenced voices deserve to be heard, hit that like button and subscribe. Because the past isn't gone, it's waiting in archives and unmarked graves, waiting for someone willing to listen. What other hidden history should we drag into the light? Let me know in the comments below.